Welcome into the Going Deep Buffalo podcast. This is Kevin Siracuse alongside Kevin Massare. And as we enter April, we are here to talk about the Bills' main positions of need because, as we know, this is draft month. So before we get into it, I want to thank Dave Dengler and the Larson Timko Funeral Home for sponsoring this video here. Larson Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimcofuneralhome.com. So, Kevin, as we enter the month of April here, what are your first thoughts as we had a couple of weeks here to sift through free agency? The Bills started out by making a lot of moves, and over the last couple of weeks, it's been pretty quiet. The last real move that they made was bringing back Dane Jackson. They haven't signed another corner. Maybe they still re-sign Rasul Douglas. Maybe they could still re-sign Amari Cooper on the opposite side of the ball. But all that to say, it's been relatively quiet. Brandon Beane has been saying, hey, in terms of James Cook, we're looking forward to the draft here, and all those extensions are in the past. They did lock up a lot of key players, with the latest one being Christian Benford. So that is very important that they solidified CB1. But would you say that CB2 is probably the biggest position of need right now?
I think it's simply, to me, it is a gaping starter hole. I know we talk about Daquan Jones a lot. He was very productive down the stretch, being top 12 in pass rush win rate. He played a really good football game in the playoffs, in my opinion. And I think he's still a little bit more stout than people want to remember. He did go out with that fluke injury in London that Brandon Beane alluded to, as well with Matt Milano. But I think he started to come back on his own. I do believe it is still a pretty good starter. Like, do you want players behind both him and Ed Oliver? Of course. But I still think he's a good starter, whereas cornerback 2, it's really a battle between Ingram, who Beane himself has just said is more of a versatile piece like Cam Lewis, who's going to bounce between all types of different positions. The special teamer, I don't think is really involved in the CB2 debate. He could have a really great spring and summer. And Dane Jackson, who's a guy like I'm not even 100% sure makes a roster. He got vet minimum. So that's what the Bills really think of him. So I think that there's an entrenched player missing. You lost Douglas and you lost Elam, and so far you've only brought in Dane Jackson. So that's the biggest position group is in that loss right now. So I do believe that cornerback 2 is by far their largest need. I think you can select a day one starter from a list of top 10 really good players. So I think the Bills will dip into that. How early is the question? I believe they're entertaining it at pick 30, but they could trickle it into the second round. There are some good names that the Bills could take, but right now I'm really thinking top 30. I'm thinking on that 30th pick has to go to cornerback. Day one starter. You just don't want to be in a place like you were with Kyrie Elam where you have to take a corner. I do think there's a lot of good ones this time, and there were some pretty good ones in that draft as well. But I think in terms of there's some really great picks around the pick 20 to pick 50 mark, and luckily the Bills will be able to play in that market. So I think that's the next move. And Beane did allude, Kevin, to the fact that the Bills may be looking at these cuts after the draft. He said it like 4 times, which was interesting to me. He kept mentioning that they could make moves and as early as right after the draft. So I think that then maybe you engage with Rasul Douglas. There's Griffins out there. There's a couple of cornerbacks out there that do still have, ASJ is technically still out there. Guy I like early on in free agency must have some injuries that they're still talking about. So there's definitely some names that could come into play at the cornerback position. James Bradbury, I know he's on the end of his career, but the Bills do kind of like players like that. So will they go the veteran route with someone cut? But I really think that they go with the top cornerback in this draft.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Kevin, because going into this offseason, I think we could all be in agreement that defensive line specifically, take your pick, right, between edge rusher and defensive tackle. But the main sentiment I feel like Bills fans saw, especially after that Super Bowl, was you have to build up the defensive line, whether it is through free agency or the draft, because look what Philadelphia did to Kansas City. They won up front and they only rushed forward. They didn't even blitz. So I think that was a main point of emphasis, that you wanted to address the defensive line, and I still want to, but right now there are more bodies on the defensive line than there are in the cornerback room, and I'm not comfortable running Dane Jackson out there as the starting boundary corner opposite Christian Benford, just like it was a couple of years ago. So as you were saying, I don't want them to pigeonhole themselves and have to go for that cornerback, because if you remember 2022, Kansas City picked up on that, jumped them, and then that's how they got Trent McDuffie. I don't know for sure if the Bills were going to take McDuffie, but that's why you don't want to really put yourself in that position. So I'm still thinking that there might be another free agency move here. You mentioned some of those guys. We talked about Douglas, maybe a James Bradbury, someone of that caliber. I feel like if they were going to sign Asante Samuel Jr., they already would have done so. But as of right now, if the draft were right now, I think I'm taking a corner.
Yeah, I think you have to. And then some of the other names just real quickly. I mean, you have Stephon Gilmore still there. Kendall Fuller is a guy. People like I said, Shaquille Griffin. There are still some names that could start as CB2 in this league, especially on a pretty good defense. So those are some names. And maybe Samuel comes around on some injury updates or some pricing. It could be a pricing situation to where the Bills are interested, but he just wants 10 plus. And it's just not going to work out. There might be a number that the Bills would entertain that at, especially after the draft. So there are some names there to still monitor. But I think to me, the Bills did go out and get Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi. I know they're on 6-game suspensions. That's fine because the Bills get the cap relief on them. And in the meantime, they do get to influx them all preseason and then put them right in the roster on week 7 as almost like 2 trade deadline acquisitions. So I think that between Dwayne Carter, obviously they like Zion Logue a lot, who they signed from the Atlanta practice squad. And obviously they're starting Oliver and Daquan Jones at the moment. There's definitely enough talent there that, to me, is a decent unit. Of course, I want more there. Especially if you're factoring in Bosa and Rousseau and AJ Epinesa and Javon Solomon, one of their promising 5th rounders last year. I think there's a lot of talent there. I'm saying I want some more talent there, but I'm not sitting here. It's not as grim as the corner position because behind, you talked about it last year a lot on our show. It's a little bit worse now because behind Dane Jackson, you're talking about Jamarcus Ingram, Brandon Codrington, Corey Couch, and Daquan Hardy, a bunch of UDFAs. So, there is an issue, not just at CB2, but the depth there. Those are some good, promising prospects, but some guys you may want all, including Dane, in the 5 and 6 cornerback range. So you really do need a true cornerback, too. You don't want to be pigeonholed into having to take one, and maybe you can pivot to D-line if for some reason there's this drastic cornerback run. I think this year's just a little bit different to where the Bills claimed it was really just McDuffie and Elam on their first-round pick basis. I still think the Bills were leaning Elam the whole way, Kevin. I don't think they got jumped for McDuffie because, from what I was told, they viewed McDuffie as a power slot, as a true number 1 slot, and the Bills had just given Taron Johnson an all-pro contract at the slot corner position. McDuffie has played both in the NFL, but at the time, the Bills definitely viewed him as a nickel corner, as a higher-end nickel corner, which they're right about. He is a high-end nickel corner. He can obviously play some boundary as well, as he's played both in KC. But anyways, as you look forward to this year, I think it's a little bit different where you definitely have Hunter and Will Johnson, but then the Barron, Revel Jr., Benjamin Morrison, Trey Amos slotting, it can go a lot of different ways. And I think the Bills will find some value there, as well as Maxwell Harrison, Darian Porter as well could come up strong to be day 1 starter. So I think there's a little bit better depth than that year. It had like Andrew Booth and a couple other players that I wasn't too intrigued by being day 1 starters. And that's what led to the Bills freaking out and taking Elam.
Well, before we get into some of these prospects here that we're going to be talking about, let's just go over the Bills draft picks, because it's important to note that Buffalo has pick 30 in round 1. They have 2 second-round picks coming at 56 and 62, and then they don't pick again until 109 in the 4th round, and that pick comes from Chicago. So because of that Amari Cooper trade, they don't have that 3rd-round pick. They have another 4th-round pick at 132, and then they have 3 5th-round picks, all of them being comp picks, one of them coming from Dallas in that Elam trade. So they pick at 169, 170, and 173. Then they have 2 6th-round picks coming at 177 and 206, and 0 7th-round picks. So right off the surface, if I'm Brandon Beane, I'm going to try to package some of those Saturday picks and try to move back up into Friday, round 3 specifically. So I guess right off the surface here, Kevin, where do you think the sweet spot is? Do you think that it makes more sense to draft a corner? I know we're just talking about drafting one at pick 30 on Thursday night, but where is that sweet spot in terms of cornerbacks and defensive tackles specifically? Do you think that it makes more sense based on this class that you want to take a corner in round 1 and then you can build through the trenches on Friday and Saturday, or vice versa?
I still think with the depth of DTs that you'd be able to get multiple defensive linemen on day 2 if you'd like. I still think you need to make sure you secure whoever you deem to be the best fit in your defense, who'd be a day 1 starter, without getting overly antsy again, like with Kyrie Elam. I think that you have to select a corner first, just because we've been mentioning it's a pretty good class, but it starts to thin out a little quicker than DT does in my opinion. And I don't know if you can wait till 56 to get one of those guys we're talking about, because I think a lot of these guys are day one starters, and day one starters don't last into the 50s. So I think that you're going to have a run on them at the end of the first and early second. So if you really wanted to trade up high into the second, you could do that. I think the smarter move is to stay at 30, select who you deem to be the best fit for your defense between a couple of guys we'll talk about, and go about it that way. And then in the second round with DT, I think you're going to have plenty of options to go with a really talented defensive tackle that you can still score, whether it's, we'll see what happens with Kenneth Grant, with Derek Harmon, with a couple of those guys that could still be available, with Tyleik Williams. There's going to be a couple of guys. They're not all going to go in the bottom of, like Alfred Collins. They're not going to all go in the bottom of the first round. I think that some of those, you're going to have a chance at somebody, just like you did with Osiris Torrance on the other side of the ball a couple of years ago.
So you would say that the corners are more top heavy than defensive tackles?
Probably. It's definitely like there is a grouping of guys and it starts to run off quickly. The defensive line group is similar, but it's just deeper than ever. So there's just so many guys there. And I think that you're going to have a really good chance at 56. But it all depends on day. Like it could change mid-draft. They could be like, holy crap, all these corners are going. Like, I don't know what we're going to do here. Or it could be like, oh my God, there's a huge run on defensive line. We do need to, we do, and there's no corners gone. We do need to determine that, like, okay, I still like 9 of these guys, but like, wow, we're already to Tyleik Williams, and we got to make a move here because we may miss one of these guys. So it's going to have to go on the fly where this draft is going to go. And Brandon Beane has said it himself. He does like to adapt as the draft is going on, which does lead to moves like coming up for Dalton Kincaid, Kyrie Elam, Tremaine Edmonds, etc. So it does lead to those kind of decisions.
Yeah, so like it makes sense, right? Like it matches where you think that it's more top heavy coming from the corners. You need a corner right now. There you go. Because then you have those 2 second-round picks to address the defensive line. Maybe if you want to throw a safety in there. But you mentioned guys like Kenneth Grant and Derek Harmon. I know those are big names among Bills Mafia right now. And if they're sitting there at pick 30, we know how the Bills like to say best player available. So that's why I find it kind of hard to believe that they only have Dane Jackson right now and Jamarcus Ingram, because as much as you want to draft the best player available, how do you balance that? Because you might almost say we have to take that corner and then potentially stray away from Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon. So that's definitely a fine line to balance, because if ever up to me, just looking at it at surface level, you say, give me a big human being, a big space eater who can come in and be Daquan Jones' replacement. We need that one tech of the future. Kenneth Grant, if he's there, take him. But to our point about corner, right now, that's more of a pressing need, and you don't want to feel like you potentially have to reach a little bit to round out your roster.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the tricky part is you even hear guys like James Pierce Jr., like maybe he falls, or a Mike Green or a Nick Scorton, like Jack Sawyer, like will they go D-end even? Like there's a couple of really powerful defensive ends that could be really huge for your roster, especially if you really want a replacement for Michael Hoyt early on in the year and you're not really sure about Epinesa. You could convince yourself that way, but I do think defensive ends is a position that they'll wait on with Javon Solomon and with Hoyt coming back in 6 weeks. So, but yeah, I mean, if you're sitting there and you see Kenneth Grant and you see Derek Harmon and maybe even Walter Nolan, 305, 6'3", 305, like, I mean, you're going to make your decisions. I do think the Bills are set at 3 tech. Brandon Beane said Ogunjobi and Dwayne Carter are your 3 techs. I think they're fairly set there behind Ed Oliver. So, you're really looking for the future behind Daquan Jones, and maybe the Bills only view Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon as that guy, and then it thins out quick at the 1 tech position, and maybe that's the move they have to make, and they're hoping that a Porter, they're hoping that a Hairston or other is available for them in one of those second-round picks, or maybe they do what you're saying. Maybe they take the DT that they want, and they're like, I don't know that one of those is going to be their 56. We may have to use those picks to come up from 56 and leave the other second-round pick at 62.
That's what I'm thinking, because if you have that potential 1 tech of the future sitting right there, I'm thinking you want to build through the trenches, right? Like that was our main goal ever since the end of the season. So I don't want to stray away from that just because Dane Jackson was your only free agent acquisition. So I don't want to potentially get scared and say, let's forget about the defensive line because we need to go get a replacement for Rasul Douglas now. But again, it's just a tough line to balance, because then if you do that, great. But would you have in rounds 2 and, well, I guess not 3, but essentially 2 picks in round 2 and then 2 in round 4 for corner. So I guess that's a good segue to talk about what do you see from those Friday and Saturday corners. Someone just jumping out at me right off the bat here is Darian Porter. You might have mentioned him. I believe he had a 9.99 RAS, just an athletic freak, 6'3". He just screams like he could be a Sean McDermott type of cornerback. What would you say about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of corners that really jump out to me now. If you're talking about Friday specifically, there's going to be a good chance that a lot of these, we're not exactly sure. If you look across rankings across the league, you're not exactly sure how Jahdae Barron, Revel Jr., Morrison, Amos, Azurie Thomas, you don't know how all of these guys are going to slot out. Maybe Porter's the guy that does jump way up in the first round, and all those other guys are available. But if you're factoring like he hasn't played corner for a while. He's a late bloomer. So that's the number one thing to remember about Porter. So maybe that will keep him in the second round range for what that athleticism will allow you to do. He's got that 6'2" with speed. So he's definitely somebody who, can typically, he's a lengthier, good with transitions type of cornerback. He's got that track speed. So, you're trying to make sure he's not a Kyrie Elam. Like you've tried to work with those tools. But ultimately, can he reroute receivers in press coverage and showing that development in the man coverage ability? I think he's going to be a really interesting prospect. But Maxwell Harrison's another guy. I know Bills fans may not want him at 30, but he's definitely a guy that I do believe is one of the better potential zone corner options for the Bills that I think will be able to do everything right. And he's a physical specimen as well. So he's another guy there that's going to be a really good decision. And then everybody's favorite, Trey Amos. I think he's just a true zone corner, man. Like I think he can do everything. I think he could step in and you don't find these true zone corners very often. I just think he's a day one starter in this defense. So that to me, that's like the Derek Harmon of corner is very similarly Trey Amos, where he can come in and do just a little bit more than be like a moldable like Clay. I think he's a day one zone corner who can do everything. So the Bills will have to take that into account when they're up on the clock.
I was going to say, looking into some of these prospects, it seems like a lot of the reports or the analysts are saying, at least what jumps out to me is, press man corner. He's athletic, but can he play zone? And that's what we went through with Kaiir Elam. Same thing in 2022. He's athletic, so maybe he can just learn and adapt the system. And clearly that didn't work out. So if you're trying to find a zone specific corner here, do you think Amos is the guy?
Yeah. You don't see a true guy that can make those breaks and reads like a zone corner can, like you see in Trey Amos. Ultimately, he's not a guy that's going to be there in the second round. He's probably going to be selected from 25 to 35. I don't know that for sure, but being from 20 to 40 won't shock me as his range. So I don't think you're going to be able to sit there and wait on a guy like him. But yeah, you don't see a true guy who has a lot of the 10 passes break up. The Bills love their PBUs. The low passer rating, like they like in Christian Benford, 54.5% in college, 3 picks, and he can play press zone as well and also shut down in man. So like, it's not like you're getting a guy that is just a little fluky, is a little athletic. Like he's done it all. And he's definitely a guy that I think the Bills would really, really like. He's scheme versatile, and that's what the Bills are going to right now. And I think it's very rare to have a guy that kind of checks those boxes and has that athletic profile that he has. And his IQ is what jumps out to me, man. Ultimately, the IQ and instincts are drastic on tape. So that's what you're looking for in a Sean McDermott defense. Trey Amos is a day one starter. Do you pass on a day one corner? Think about this. You can entrench Trey Amos with Christian Benford for 5 years apiece. I think that's very valuable for the Bills to have your 1 and your 2 locked up with, obviously, Taron Johnson. That's what the Bills are looking for. You can do that in this draft. Don't overthink it. I think Trey Amos is a really good pick at 30.
I mean, I would agree with that. But again, I just keep coming back to defensive tackle. But to the points that you were making, it seems like you can find more depth on Friday and Saturday. Now, I do want to ask you about safety because I don't want to completely forget about this position either. And I know that a lot of people have been talking about either A, Malachi Starks, or B, Nick Emanwari, the huge safety from South Carolina, 6'3", 220. Malachi Starks weighing in at 197 with his 6'1" frame. So Starks will probably be drafted maybe like top 20, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is like you're looking at BPA if you go safety. Like the Bills, the issue with safety is we're talking about a little bit at defensive end. At safety, you're talking about them liking rep, being just coming out and saying he's entrenched as a player here. They love the potential of what Bishop showed in the playoffs and who he is. And they just took him in that same range that we're talking about here with some of these other guys in the second round. So they love to turn that over. And they do have two guys behind them in Forrest, who played really well in Washington at times, does deserve more reps. And Hamlin, who we know the Bills love on teams, as well as can be a starter as a back end starter. So like that unit's a lot different than corner to me. And it's even DT. Like, I just don't know that you can sink a premier choice right now into safety unless you really do get a faller like Starks. Then you can say, like, I guess he is a top end player for this defense. The Bills have just never put in more value than they have, like with a Bishop pick. I'm struggling to find the fit there unless it truly is the BPA with Emanwari, or I like Emanwari, or with Starks. It still leaves a gap at CB2. Now you're pushing Bishop to the bench, and it still leaves a gap at, whatever the one tech position that we're talking about. And it does put some pressure in the second round, some heavy pressure to make sure you get a DT and to make sure you get a corner. You are now in a range where you're getting a little fishy with, like, how do I work this board? Because now that I've taken a safety first, I have no room for error now in the rest of my draft board. So I think you get a little bit squirrely doing that. But if he is deemed to be there, both great players, I wouldn't just take any safety, but those guys could be game-changing difference makers for your defense. So it isn't a position I'm forgetting about. It is one where I think the Bills feel more comfortable with Rapp and Bishop than the average fan may. So I think that's the number one thing to remember about the safety position.
Okay, so my final question. If you could have your choice, right? All three of these players, actually 4 players, are available at pick number 30. Which one you're going with? Nick Ebenmori, Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, Trey Amos. What is the pick for the Buffalo Bills at pick 30?
I mean, really, that's a great board to have available. Like, you're talking about the guys you'd want at each position group. I mean, throw in a couple of receivers while you're at it, and you have a pretty good board of really being able to see what you want to do. I think I've spoken highly enough about Trey Amos. Can play zone, can play man, excels in run support. We heard Brandon Beane talk about and Sean McDermott talk about you need to be able to play the run, not be pile watchers, as Brandon put it yesterday. So I think that's huge for corner. He said, when you guys are writing or podcasting, make sure you're talking about their ability to play run support. And he's an athlete. Like, he still is an athlete with good size. He checks the McDermott boxes. I'm going Trey Amos if that's the board available for me. If Amos is off the board, you probably do think long and hard about Emanwari. But ultimately, for the same reasons you've mentioned, you probably take a one tech. If Amos is off the board. I'm not just selecting corner for no reason. You had Amos on the board, so that's where I'm selecting with your choice. But I like Grant. I would not be mad at Kenneth Grant or with Harmon. I think both of them can come in and be 4-year, 5-year defensive one techs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would tend to agree with you because as of right now, again, they are very thin at corner, and you locked up Christian Benford. That is great. But what do you have opposite him right now? And they don't have anything for the future. Was Dane Jackson's, that was just a 1-year deal, right?
1-year vet minimum. And the biggest chicken or the egg debate about the Philadelphia Eagles conversation is Patrick Mahomes had the most time to throw in the Super Bowl that he's had in the playoffs, 3.2 seconds roughly. And against the Bills, he had the least amount of time to throw. You would have think that's reverse. Receivers were winning at the line of scrimmage, thus going back to the argument. Philadelphia's back end with Cooper DeJean, Slay, a couple of their other top end, and obviously Quinyon Mitchell, their draft pick at corner, 2 in the DB's spot, were the reasons that Mahomes held the ball and thus made bad decisions and got sacked. So there's that big chicken or the egg debate right now with people were getting beat off the line against the Chiefs, including Kyrie Elam playing 12 yards off the line. And it just wasn't good enough for the Bills. And Rasul Douglas was kind of starting to fade by the end of his tenure in Buffalo, that those were easy matchups for Mahomes. Will the Bills finally secure the cornerback position, 5 years apiece to have a CB1 and a CB2 and keep Taron Johnson? That's really intriguing to Brandon Beane and the Bills.
Yeah, for sure, because we know how Sean McDermott loves his defensive backs, but we also know how they've been trying to make it a priority to build through the trenches. So that's why it's just such an interesting conversation to have, considering that these players would hypothetically be on the board, because really, I mean, I don't think you could go wrong with either player. I would probably put Emanwari at the bottom because for the reasons you laid out, I don't see safety being a pressing need. But if it's Trey Amos, Kenneth Grant, or Derek Harmon, I mean, take your pick, right?
Ultimately, they're going to view what they think. If Amos is still on the board at 30, maybe the Bills feel like they can get a Porter or a Harrison or a Morrison or some version of those later on. They're probably feeling pretty good if Amos just definitely falls to 30. But for the same reasons you were just talking about, you built through the trenches, even further away from the trenches is the safety position. So ultimately, you have two starters. You really do. You have a draft choice and a Rap who they really do love, and they want to keep him healthy. And he is pivotal to this defense. They were missing him against the Chiefs as well. I just think they have two starters there at the moment. You can't really say that about corner, and you can say that about DT, but it's just weaker. They do more rotation there. They're not going to rotate their safeties as much as people think. So ultimately, all you're doing is you're pushing Bishop to the bench. So he's sitting now. You still have a hole at corner. You still don't have your one tech. You got to really be sure that Eman is a game changer for you, because otherwise you're passing up on guys like Amos or Harmon. They'd have to really say this guy's going to be the difference maker in big moments, and that's fine if they think that. But they have two starters at safety. It's far from the line of scrimmage. Sinking a premium asset into Bishop is as much as they've ever done. I don't think they're going to go and then sink another one, a higher asset over Bishop than they normally do at safety. They normally sign guys like Hyde and Poyer or Rapp. Like they don't
Eric
generally.
Forrest.
They don't have a track record of saying we need a first or second round safeties, and now they have one in Bishop. I think Bishop and Rapp is your safety combo, bearing something they really view Starks as like a day one, 5 to 10 year, all pro style of safety. Other than that, I can't see them getting safety. I can see them getting a depth guy, but I really can't see them in the first day or two.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we will see what the Buffalo Bills decide to do. And, Kevin, as we've been saying, there still could be another free agent signing. Maybe there is a Rasul Douglas re-signing. And we didn't even talk about wide receiver, but I think everyone can agree that defense is the main focus here. So I guess one final question, just so we can put this out there. Any chance of a wide receiver round 1, even round 2? Or that's probably more Saturday, right?
I think round 2 could sneak in for sure. Like if we want to put this out there, I don't think there's much at round 1. With the 2 round 2s, if you do say you do score a Tyleek Williams and a Trey Amos, receiver does open up to the availability of an Isaiah Bond or a Higgins or whomever is available at 62. 62 is absolutely on the table for a receiver. I think that's available for a BPA player. At 30, maybe if you really like Trey Harris or Golden. But outside of that, I don't see much of a opportunity unless they really do view a receiver 1 that happened to fall.
Yeah, that is a good point, because not only have the Bills not re-signed Amari Cooper yet, let's not forget that Mac Hollins is in New England. So they only signed Josh Palmer, so there is still one opening. Do they want to leave that for a rookie? Are they going to re-sign Cooper? So to your point, I mean, they really could say, hey, those are some big shoes to fill for Amari Cooper, because I don't know, is Josh Palmer the Cooper replacement? Is he more of a Mac Hollins replacement? Is he more in the middle? So they might say, we really do need to touch this position up, and maybe 62 comes into play. So anyways, thank you guys again for tuning in, and make sure you follow Kevin and I for more draft coverage as we get closer to the 2025 NFL Draft.